Welcome to Peaceful Stories, where the quietest voices carry the greatest weight. Today, we uncover the life of a spy who changed history in silence. Christine Granville, born Krystyna Skarbek on May 1, 1908, in Warsaw, Poland, lived a life that seemed designed for legend. Her story spans aristocratic privilege, national tragedy, and wartime heroism, culminating in a tragic end that remains haunting to this day. Underscore 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 underscore. Early life and family background, 1908 to 1925. Krystyna Skarbek was born into a world of privilege and tradition. Her father, Count Jerzy Skarbek, came from one of Poland's oldest noble families, part of the Szlachta, who held influence and land for centuries. Though the title of Count had no formal recognition after the partitions of Poland, the Skarbeks maintained the air and customs of aristocracy. Her family traced their lineage back to the 11th century, and the legacy of honor and service ran through the generations. Her mother, Stefania Goldfeder, came from a wealthy Jewish banking family. This mixed heritage of nobility and financial acumen gave Krystyna a complex social position, aristocratic yet with Jewish roots in an increasingly anti-Semitic Europe. Stefania was elegant and cultured, devoted to her daughter's education and social refinement. The Skarbeks owned large estates in Trzepnica and maintained a home in Warsaw. Krystyna's early life unfolded in manor houses surrounded by forests and farmland. Her days were filled with horseback riding, hunting trips with her father, and exposure to multiple languages, Polish, French, and some English. The household was steeped in art, literature, and nationalist fervor. She was particularly close to her father, who encouraged her independence and intellect, but was also indulgent and emotionally distant. At school, Krystyna showed great promise but also impatience with convention. She attended a convent school run by the Sisters of Nazareth, where she frequently clashed with teachers. Her sharp tongue and unwillingness to blindly accept authority marked her early on as different. Though sometimes seen as rebellious, she was deeply curious, drawn to stories of ancient warriors, explorers, and revolutionaries. The interwar period in Poland was tumultuous. After regaining independence in 1918 following over a century of partition, the Second Polish Republic was trying to rebuild itself. National identity was fiercely important, and Krystyna grew up hearing stories of uprisings, heroic failures, and ultimate freedom. This romantic nationalism influenced her profoundly. Meanwhile, the family's wealth began to erode. Her father, while charismatic and cultured, was reckless with money. He gambled, hosted lavish parties, and made unwise investments. The economic strain of the Great Depression hit landowning families hard. Portions of the estate were sold off, and the aura of grandeur dimmed. Eventually, the once mighty Skarbeks found themselves on the edge of ruin. Her father's death from tuberculosis in the mid-1920s left a permanent mark. Krystyna was devastated. He had been her idol, despite his flaws, and his passing shook the foundations of her identity. She inherited his restlessness, charm, and determination, along with a sense of living on borrowed time. Faced with an uncertain future, Krystyna began to forge her own path. She briefly worked in a Warsaw automobile showroom, not because she needed the money, but because she craved novelty and excitement. She joined ski clubs, competed in equestrian events, and was known for speeding through the countryside in her car, sometimes barefoot, to the scandal of her peers. She was a modern woman in a society that still expected conformity. Tall, strikingly beautiful, with high cheekbones and expressive eyes, she attracted attention wherever she went. But beneath the surface glamour was a woman constantly searching for freedom, for meaning, and for a cause worth fighting for. Her early years were not just a prelude to war, they were an apprenticeship in courage, rebellion, and resilience. 2. A Marriage of Convenience and the Call of Africa, 1930 to 1936. In 1930, at the age of 22, Krystyna entered into a marriage with Count Jerzy Gizicki, a man 15 years her senior, a fellow aristocrat, writer, and diplomat. The match was not built on love but on social expediency and perhaps Krystyna's desire to escape the narrowing options of her post-aristocratic world. Gizicki was a curious figure, Intelligent, widely traveled, and passionate about Africa, but also reportedly domineering, moody, and controlling. Their marriage was, from the outset, a union of opposites. Krystyna was fiercely independent, spontaneous, and deeply restless, while Gizicki demanded structure, order, and deference. Still, their shared curiosity about the world, and particularly Africa, led to an unusual chapter in Krystyna's life. Shortly after their marriage, the couple traveled to East Africa, specifically to Kenya, then a British colony. They settled on a remote estate near Lake Naivasha, hoping to make a living from farming and writing. The lifestyle was rustic and physically demanding. Days were filled with overseeing farmhands, tending to crops, and managing the unforgiving conditions of the African interior. Krystyna took quickly to life in the wild. She relished the sense of adventure and the physical freedom it offered. She learned how to ride for hours through the bush, shoot expertly, and live without the comforts of high society. She formed friendships with local Kikuyu and Maasai people, attempting to learn their languages and customs. It was in Africa that Krystyna's toughness and resilience became more pronounced. She was known to go on solo expeditions into the highlands with little more than a rifle and compass. However, the marriage to Gizicki soon began to unravel. His possessiveness clashed with her growing independence. He wanted a dutiful wife who would conform to aristocratic norms. She wanted freedom, exploration, and self-definition. Arguments became frequent, sometimes violent. At one point, according to later accounts, Gizicki tried to lock her in a hut during an argument, and Krystyna escaped by crawling through a window and disappearing on horseback for days. Her time in Africa also sparked her fascination with geopolitics and colonialism. She began reading deeply on the history of empire, war, and diplomacy. Though never overtly political in her early writings, there is a thread of anti-colonial empathy and complex understanding of power dynamics that would later influence her approach to espionage. When the Kenyan adventure failed, due to economic hardship, a hostile marriage, and Krystyna's dissatisfaction, the couple returned to Europe by the mid-1930s. They separated soon after. Krystyna kept the title of countess, but discarded the domestic role it had once implied. Her African sojourn had transformed her. She was no longer just a beautiful Polish noblewoman. She was now hardened by survival in the wild, familiar with isolation, skilled with weapons, and, most importantly, possessed of a fearlessness that set her apart. Back in Europe, she wandered through Switzerland, Italy, and France. She returned often to the Tatra mountains in southern Poland, rekindling her passion for skiing. She even competed in national competitions and became known for her daring descents and her ability to navigate the most treacherous terrain. These physical skills, endurance, cold weather resilience, and spatial memory, would prove critical in her clandestine missions during the war. By the late 1930s, the world was changing fast. Hitler had seized power in Germany. The Anschluss and Munich Agreement had revealed the cowardice of European powers. Poland was being squeezed from both sides by two rising totalitarian regimes. Krystyna felt the ominous shift. While many in her circles still clung to parties and salons, she sensed war on the horizon. She was not afraid. As 1939 approached, she waited for her chance to fight, not for glory, but for Poland, for freedom, and for something greater than herself. 3. The collapse of Poland and the birth of Christine Granville, 1939 to 1940. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 by Nazi Germany, followed just days later by the Soviet invasion from the east, marked not just the disintegration of a country, but the profound rebirth of Krystyna Skarbek's identity. These traumatic events would transform her into a woman of action, reborn as Christine Granville, a name that would echo across the clandestine corridors of Europe. When the German blitzkrieg stormed into Poland on September 1, 1939, Krystyna was in her early 30s and living in Warsaw. The speed of the invasion was staggering, and though Poland's army fought valiantly, it was no match for Germany's modernized war machine. The Luftwaffe bombarded cities, trains, and refugee columns. Tanks rolled over the plains, and thousands of civilians were caught in the crossfire. Krystyna witnessed firsthand the chaos: families torn apart, homes reduced to rubble, and terrified masses fleeing to the east. The occupation of Poland marked the beginning of a systematic campaign of terror. Jews were herded into ghettos. Polish intellectuals and officers were arrested and executed. Libraries were burned. Cultural life was stifled. Krystyna, with her half-Jewish background and patriotic spirit, immediately understood that neutrality or silence was not an option. Poland, her homeland, was being suffocated. Her first instinct was flight, not to save herself, but to reposition. Alongside her mother, Stefania, she escaped south to Hungary, slipping across the Carpathian Mountains. In Budapest, she connected with the Polish embassy and exiled diplomats who were already trying to form a resistance network in exile. It was here that she first offered her services to British intelligence. She wanted to fight, not as a soldier, but as a courier, a spy, a smuggler of hope. In December 1939, she approached the British embassy in Budapest with a daring proposal to return to occupied Poland via the mountains and establish contact with the Polish resistance. The British initially scoffed at her offer. A woman? With no formal training? And yet, something about her charisma, her steely eyes, and her unwavering determination forced a second look. Eventually, the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, and MI6 realized what they had before them: a rare asset, fluent in several languages, highly intelligent, and utterly fearless. To work with British intelligence, she adopted a new identity: Christine Granville. The name was chosen to sound convincingly English, yet obscure enough to avoid suspicion. This transformation marked a symbolic rebirth. Krystyna Skarbek, the restless countess of a crumbling aristocracy, had now become Christine Granville, spy, courier, patriot, and weapon of war. Her mission was perilous. She was to re-enter occupied Poland on skis, via the snowbound Tatra mountains during the dead of winter, evading both Nazi and Soviet patrols. Before departing, she underwent rudimentary training, though most of her skill came not from textbooks but from years of skiing in the Tatras, hunting in Africa, and living by her wits. Her survival instincts were already honed to a razor's edge. In early 1940, Christine made the treacherous crossing. The journey through the Carpathians took days, through snowstorms, avalanche-prone slopes, and ice-laced forests. She traveled with forged documents, a concealed pistol, and microfilm hidden in the lining of her coat. Her contacts in the Polish resistance were astonished to see her. Many considered her journey suicidal. Yet she had returned, not as a messenger of despair, but of defiance. Within Poland, she gathered intelligence on German troop movements, the brutality of the occupation, and the crumbling state of morale among civilians. She also helped organize escape routes for Allied soldiers and couriers trying to flee to neutral countries. The information she smuggled out, hidden in ski poles, sewn into her clothing, or encoded in letters, proved invaluable to British command. One of her most astonishing feats during this time was when she personally smuggled out a report detailing the Nazis' early actions against Jews, political prisoners, and cultural institutions. This document would become one of the earliest credible accounts to reach the West of what was happening behind Nazi lines. Her bravery, however, came at a price. Christine's physical health began to decline. She contracted frostbite and suffered chronic pain in her legs and feet. The constant tension of evading capture, combined with the moral weight of what she witnessed, took a deep toll. Yet she never wavered. She would continue these missions several times over the next year, each one more dangerous than the last. On one return to Hungary, she narrowly escaped arrest by bribing a Gestapo officer with cigarettes and gold. Her calm under pressure was so astonishing that British handlers began referring to her in admiring terms, noting that she had more courage than many trained male agents. By late 1940, Christine was becoming legendary within the SOE. Her daring missions, coupled with her beauty and mystique, made her a kind of myth. Yet the myth was built on very real risks. Each trip could have ended with torture, execution, or disappearance. She knew the price. She kept going. Her work had now moved beyond espionage. She was becoming a symbol, a beacon to those resisting tyranny, a weapon of psychological warfare against the Nazi narrative that claimed resistance was futile. And all of this was just the beginning. 4. The Tatra missions, smuggling into occupied Poland, 1940. The Tatra Mountains, stretching along the border between southern Poland and Slovakia, were more than a beautiful alpine range. They became one of the most dangerous corridors for wartime couriers. For Christine Granville, these mountains were both a physical and symbolic threshold. Crossing them meant leaving relative safety and re-entering a land soaked in violence, fear, and resistance. It was here that Christine conducted some of her most harrowing and heroic work. In early 1940, she began what would become a series of perilous missions into occupied Poland. Her role was complex, a courier for the resistance, a smuggler of microfilm and intelligence, and a psychological weapon who brought hope to those living under Nazi rule. The British Special Operations executive had come to depend on her. No one knew the terrain like she did. No one could move through danger quite like Christine Granville. Her route began in Budapest. From there, she would travel by train or car to Slovakia, using false identity papers, sometimes as a Hungarian aristocrat, sometimes as a governess or peasant girl. The border region was crawling with German patrols, Hungarian gendarmes, and Soviet agents. Christine's appearance, a striking woman with sharp cheekbones and an aristocratic bearing, did not help. But her fluency in Polish, French, and German allowed her to slip between roles with convincing charm. Once in the mountain villages, she relied on local guides, smugglers, shepherds, and resistance sympathizers to help her ascend the steep, snow-covered passes. The routes were treacherous, filled with ice-covered crevices and subject to whiteouts. Christine wore men's clothing, heavy boots, and a thick coat stitched with secret pockets. Her most prized possessions were not weapons, but film canisters, coded documents, and messages from the exiled Polish government to the underground. Each crossing was a dance with death. Patrols roamed the high passes with dogs and skis. Christine had to time her movements perfectly, often hiding in abandoned shepherd huts or snow caves until nightfall. She was known for her uncanny ability to sense danger, a sort of sixth sense sharpened by months of living on the edge. In one mission, she narrowly avoided capture by diving into a snowbank and covering herself with a white parachute cloth, lying still for hours as a patrol passed within meters of her. Inside occupied Poland, she moved carefully from town to town. Her contacts were embedded in a web of underground resistance groups, teachers, priests, railway workers, and students who used couriers like Christine to pass intelligence to the Allies. She brought hope, cigarettes, money, and news from the outside world. She also collected first-hand reports of German atrocities, which she memorized or encoded and carried back with her. In one of her most daring actions, Christine helped smuggle out critical documentation about the Katyn massacre, the Soviet execution of thousands of Polish officers. This evidence, along with details about early deportations of Jews and the establishment of ghettos, helped shape British and Allied understanding of Nazi and Soviet crimes in Poland. Her information made its way to Churchill's war cabinet. Christine was also a vital lifeline for exiled Polish officers and British prisoners of war. On one mission, she helped facilitate the escape of a British airman who had been shot down and was hiding in Krakow. Disguised as a German Red Cross nurse, she escorted the wounded man across 3 border checkpoints using a fabricated medical file and a bribe paid in gold watches. Her ability to manipulate her environment and people was legendary. She once bluffed her way through a German inspection by feigning outrage and claiming to be the mistress of a Hungarian general. The bluff worked. The officer apologized and even offered her safe passage. Back in Hungary, her reputation began to grow. The Gestapo suspected a female courier operating between Budapest and Krakow, but Christine never used the same route twice. She dyed her hair, changed her accent, and maintained a rotating wardrobe of identities. She kept a cyanide pill sewn into her clothing in case she was captured. The physical toll was immense. Her frostbite worsened. She developed chronic bronchitis. And yet she never stopped. Between January and August 1940, she crossed the Tatra mountains at least 5 times, each journey a feat of endurance, cunning, and luck. These missions were not just about information, they were about connection. In the villages and cities of occupied Poland, Christine became a living symbol of defiance. People whispered her name. Her arrival in a village was a cause for quiet celebration. Even hardened resistance fighters looked to her with awe. Her work eventually drew the attention of German counterintelligence. In late 1940, a failed operation led to the arrest of one of her contacts, and Christine was nearly captured in a Krakow safe house. She escaped on foot, moving under cover of night, and reached Slovakia after a 3-day journey through freezing woods, without food or rest. Her feet were bleeding, her body emaciated. Still, she delivered her intel. By the end of 1940, the British knew they had something extraordinary in Christine Granville. Her courage, resourcefulness, and sheer audacity had few rivals. She had risked her life repeatedly to bring truth to light, to support those fighting in the shadows, and to ignite sparks of resistance wherever she passed. The Tatra missions were just the beginning of her transformation from a daring spy to a legend of the war. What she endured in those mountains, cold, fear, pain, and isolation, only forged her resolve. And with each return to Budapest, with each step back into enemy territory, Christine Granville carved her name deeper into the secret history of resistance. Imprisonment and escape in Hungary, 1941. In early 1941, Christine Granville's luck began to thin. The Gestapo and Hungarian secret police had caught wind of her movements. An informant betrayed her whereabouts in Budapest, and the house she was using as a safe location was raided. She was arrested alongside Andrzej Kawarski, her partner, confidant, and fellow Polish agent. Christine was taken to a Hungarian prison, an old, gray stone facility near the Danube, damp with mold and thick with a stench of mildew and fear. Her cell was small, windowless, and cold, with a thin blanket, a straw mattress, and iron bars that bit into her wrists when she tried to stand. Kawarski was held separately, and the two were denied any communication. At first, the interrogations were gentle. She was questioned by Hungarian officers who wanted her to confess to being a British spy. She denied everything, presenting herself as a Polish refugee stranded by the war. When that didn't work, the tone shifted. German officials were brought in, members of the Sicherheitsdienst (SD), the Nazi intelligence agency. These men had a different approach: threats, psychological pressure, and starvation. Christine refused to break. She used her charm and linguistic agility to manipulate her captors, sowing confusion about her background. She feigned illness, faked hysteria, and delivered convincing tales about noble lineage and tragic displacement. She also attempted to make herself look ill and frail by fasting voluntarily. This wasn't just deception, it was strategic. Christine needed time, and every day she could buy in that cell was one more opportunity for a rescue or a diplomatic breakthrough. Kawarski, meanwhile, was undergoing his own grueling interrogation. The Hungarians believed he was a British operative, an accusation he could not afford to confirm. Together, they represented a major intelligence breach if either one were broken. But both of them held firm. Weeks passed. The British embassy was alerted by underground contacts, and diplomatic pressure began to mount. Christine's Polish nobility, combined with rumors of her connections to prominent British officers, helped. She and Kawarski were transferred to another holding facility with slightly better conditions. Here, Christine cultivated relationships with the guards, occasionally bribing them with cigarettes or favors to pass messages or smuggle food. But the most astonishing moment came when Christine staged her own tuberculosis scare. Knowing that tuberculosis was greatly feared and poorly understood by guards, she began coughing violently and spitting into a handkerchief, which she stained with red dye smuggled in with lipstick. She convinced a sympathetic prison doctor to sign a document suggesting she was seriously ill. The rumor spread quickly, and within days, higher authorities began to worry that they were about to be blamed for the death of a noble woman of international interest. By mid-1941, the British and Polish diplomatic corps had worked out a backdoor deal with Hungarian authorities. In exchange for a quiet release and the assurance that Christine and Kawarski would leave Hungary immediately, the charges were dropped under the radar. Christine's release was quiet, but the effect on her was profound. She had lost weight, suffered bronchial infections, and her nerves were frayed. Yet she emerged more defiant than ever. Her time in prison didn't break her. It deepened her resolve. Her escape wasn't merely physical, it was a symbolic rebirth. She had withstood some of the worst tools of psychological warfare and emerged with her secrets intact. Following her release, Christine and Kawarski made their way out of Hungary, traveling under assumed identities. They passed through Yugoslavia and eventually reached British-controlled territory in Cairo. It was the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Her legend had already begun to grow among intelligence circles in London. She had proven she could survive torture, deception, and isolation, and still return with her mission unbroken. In Cairo, she would soon take on a new identity as a formal agent of the Special Operations Executive. But her experiences in Hungarian captivity would follow her into every future mission. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the ability to act decisively in spite of it. 6. Cairo Years and Restlessness, 1941 to 1943. After escaping from Hungary, Christine Granville and Andrzej Kawarski arrived in Cairo in late 1941. The city was a hub of espionage activity during the war, a maelstrom of spies, diplomats, and exiles. Cairo in wartime had an almost surreal duality, a frontline city soaked in shadow games, where every whispered conversation might be an intelligence leak, yet also a place of vibrant nightlife, decadent parties, and British officers lounging beneath ceiling fans with gin in hand. Christine found herself at the center of it all. The Special Operations Executive, SOE, had begun recruiting heavily in the region, and she was immediately placed under evaluation for field deployment. Her prior work in Poland and Hungary, combined with her mastery of multiple languages, Polish, French, German, and English, made her an ideal candidate. Yet, she was not initially embraced. The SOE's upper ranks were still dominated by men, many of whom distrusted women in combat roles, let alone espionage. Christine's unorthodox methods, dramatic flair, and fierce independence made her both admired and resented. She dismissed protocols she deemed inefficient, clashed with superiors over operational priorities, and insisted on equal treatment despite being the only woman in her section. She spent long stretches in limbo, technically under orders but not deployed. These months were a mixture of restlessness and frustration. Christine loathed inaction. She applied again and again for missions into Nazi-occupied Europe, but bureaucratic delays and territorial disputes between British intelligence arms kept her grounded. To fill the time, Christine worked with the Polish section of the SOE, helping to train new agents in clandestine techniques, silent killing, radio transmission, identity crafting, dead-drop communication, and sabotage. She developed a reputation as both a terrifyingly capable field agent and a passionate mentor. Recruits remembered her piercing eyes, her razor-sharp criticism, and her unwavering belief in the cause of a free Poland. But even in Cairo, she wasn't entirely safe. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, had extended its reach, and Cairo was crawling with enemy informants. Christine was constantly under threat of surveillance or assassination. She frequently changed residences, moved only under the cover of darkness, and carried a small pistol in her handbag at all times. Once, she detected that her room had been searched and the positioning of her hairbrush altered. She never returned to that flat again. Personal relationships, meanwhile, grew complicated. Her connection with Kowarski deepened into a fusion of friendship, codependency, and mutual respect, but never quite romance. Christine remained elusive in love, perhaps haunted by the idea that true intimacy was incompatible with the life of a spy. She had suitors, British officers, Polish exiles, even Egyptian nobility, but she held them all at arm's length. Some believed she feared her death was inevitable and refused to tether anyone to her fate. It wasn't until late 1942, after considerable internal lobbying by senior SOE figures who recognized her talent, that Christine was finally cleared for parachute deployment into France. This required further physical training, long-distance running, night navigation, resistance to interrogation simulations, and advanced explosives use. Christine passed every trial with characteristic intensity, even outperforming many male counterparts. In early 1943, she was summoned to a private meeting. Her next mission was codenamed Operation Savannah, and it would take her into the heart of occupied France. She would be parachuted into the Rhône-Alpes region under deep cover to support the French resistance, coordinate with local Maquis units, gather German troop movements, and prepare the terrain for the anticipated Allied invasion. Before her departure, she wrote a letter to a friend in London. "I do not know if I shall return, but I go knowing I am doing the only thing I have ever wanted, to fight, not to wait." As Christine prepared for the most dangerous chapter of her life, she cut a figure that was equal parts myth and reality. In Cairo, she had transformed herself from an exile to an elite agent. What lay ahead would test her to the limits of human endurance, but she was ready. 7. Operation Savannah and the French Resistance, 1944. In early 1944, Christine Granville parachuted into the Rhône-Alpes region of France as part of Operation Savannah. Her landing, though planned with precision, was not without peril. It was a moonless night, and she touched down near the Verkers Plateau, a hotbed of French resistance activity. Hidden by the trees, She quickly buried her parachute and rendezvoused with local contacts using coded phrases. Her false identity, Madame Pauline Armand, a French widow and traveling textile merchant. Christine's role was multifaceted. She was a courier, a liaison, an intelligence gatherer, and a morale builder. Her first major task was to establish contact with a series of scattered Maquis resistance cells in the area and unify them under a coordinated strategy. This required not only charm and courage, but deep psychological insight. Many local commanders were distrustful of outside agents, especially women, but Christine's disarming honesty and battlefield experience quickly won them over. She traveled by foot, bicycle, and train, often carrying explosives, forged papers, or coded reports. She mapped German checkpoints, noted troop movements, and even eavesdropped on high-ranking officers while pretending to be a cleaning woman or seamstress. She slept in barns, mountain huts, and abandoned chateaux, always on the move, always one whisper away from betrayal. Her closest collaborators were men who would later recount stories of her iron will and reckless bravery. One incident, recorded in Esli archives, tells of Christine bicycling nearly 40 kilometers through German territory to warn a resistance unit of an impending raid. She arrived moments before the attack, saving dozens of lives. Another time, she calmly bluffed her way through a checkpoint by pretending to be a grieving widow returning from her husband's funeral, with forged documents, a fake wedding ring, and even tears that she could summon on command. Christine also played a critical role in directing airdrops of weapons and supplies. Using coded radio transmissions, she coordinated with British pilots, identifying drop zones with handkerchiefs laid out in fields or blinking flashlights in prearranged Morse sequences. Every drop was a risk. Many were missed, captured, or intercepted. But thanks to Christine's coordination, many reached their intended targets and fueled crucial sabotage missions against railways, bridges, and power lines. By mid-1944, the Gestapo was actively hunting a mysterious foreign woman who had been seen across multiple sectors. Christine's name and aliases were on their watch lists. The noose was tightening. But even as the danger increased, her resolve only deepened. She moved further into the mountains, working closely with one of the most crucial SWI circuits in southeastern France. Then came her most audacious mission, the rescue of key SWI agents captured by the Germans and imprisoned in Digny-les-Bains. When her comrades, Francis Kammertz, Zen Fielding, and Christian Sorensen, were arrested by the Gestapo, Christine sprang into action. With no time to wait for London's approval, she devised a plan based on audacity rather than stealth. She marched straight into the Gestapo headquarters in Digny, disguised as a Red Cross nurse. She claimed to be the niece of General Montgomery and threatened massive Allied retaliation if her relatives were not released. She carried no weapon, just confidence, lies, and the power of performance. She even presented a forged letter implying diplomatic immunity. Miraculously, it worked. The Gestapo officer, convinced he was dealing with someone far too dangerous to kill, negotiated a bribe and released the men into Christine's custody. They walked free the next day, one of the most astonishing and daring acts of the entire French resistance saga. After the liberation of the area by Allied forces, Christine remained active in the Rhone Valley, aiding in the roundup of collaborators, identifying Nazi sympathizers, and helping refugees find safety. But her role as a clandestine agent was coming to an end. The war was shifting, and so was her place in it. By late 1944, her name had become legend among both the resistance and SWI circles. To the Maquis, she was La Fantôme Blanche, the white ghost, appearing and vanishing in moments, leaving behind instructions, weapons, or hope. To her British handlers, she was one of the most valuable field agents in continental Europe. But Christine herself was already beginning to feel displaced. The war that had given her purpose was slowly ending. And with peace, she sensed a darkness she could not yet name, a foreboding that would prove tragically prophetic. 7. Operation Savannah and the French Resistance, 1944. In early 1944, Christine Granville parachuted into the Rhône-Alpes region of France as part of Operation Savannah. Her landing, though planned with precision, was not without peril. It was a moonless night, and she touched down near the Verkers Plateau, a hotbed of French resistance activity. Hidden by the trees, she quickly buried her parachute and rendezvoused with local contacts using coded phrases. Her false identity, Madame Pauline Armand, a French widow and traveling textile merchant. Christine's role was multifaceted. She was a courier, a liaison, an intelligence gatherer, and a morale builder. Her first major task was to establish contact with a series of scattered Maquis resistance cells in the area and unify them under a coordinated strategy. This required not only charm and courage, but deep psychological insight. Many local commanders were distrustful of outside agents, especially women, but Christine's disarming honesty and battlefield experience quickly won them over. She traveled by foot, bicycle, and train, often carrying explosives, forged papers, or coded reports. She mapped German checkpoints, noted troop movements, and even eavesdropped on high-ranking officers while pretending to be a cleaning woman or seamstress. She slept in barns, mountain huts, and abandoned chateaux, always on the move, always one whisper away from betrayal. Her closest collaborators were men who would later recount stories of her iron will and reckless bravery. One incident, recorded in SLE archives, tells of Christine bicycling nearly 40 kilometers through German territory to warn a resistance unit of an impending raid. She arrived moments before the attack, saving dozens of lives. Another time, she calmly bluffed her way through a checkpoint by pretending to be a grieving widow returning from her husband's funeral, with forged documents, a fake wedding ring, and even tears that she could summon on command. Christine also played a critical role in directing airdrops of weapons and supplies. Using coded radio transmissions, she coordinated with British pilots, identifying drop zones with handkerchiefs laid out in fields or blinking flashlights in prearranged Morse sequences. Every drop was a risk. Many were missed, captured, or intercepted. But thanks to Christine's coordination, many reached their intended targets and fueled crucial sabotage missions against railways, bridges, and power lines. By mid-1944, the Gestapo was actively hunting a mysterious foreign woman who had been seen across multiple sectors. Christine's name and aliases were on their watch lists. The noose was tightening, but even as the danger increased, her resolve only deepened. She moved further into the mountains, working closely with one of the most crucial SOE circuits in southeastern France. Then came her most audacious mission, the rescue of key SOE agents captured by the Germans and imprisoned in Digny-les-Bains. When her comrades, Francis Kammertz and Fielding and Christian Sorensen, were arrested by the Gestapo, Christine sprang into action. With no time to wait for London's approval, she devised a plan based on audacity rather than stealth. She marched straight into the Gestapo headquarters in Digny, disguised as a Red Cross nurse. She claimed to be the niece of General Montgomery and threatened massive Allied retaliation if her relatives were not released. She carried no weapon, just confidence, lies, and the power of performance. She even presented a forged letter implying diplomatic immunity. Miraculously, it worked. The Gestapo officer, convinced he was dealing with someone far too dangerous to kill, negotiated a bribe and released the men into Christine's custody. They walked free the next day, one of the most astonishing and daring acts of the entire French resistance saga. After the liberation of the area by Allied forces, Christine remained active in the Rhone Valley, aiding in the roundup of collaborators, identifying Nazi sympathizers, and helping refugees find safety. But her role as a clandestine agent was coming to an end. The war was shifting, and so was her place in it. By late 1944, her name had become legend among both the resistance and SOE circles. To the Maquis, she was La Fantôme Blanche, the white ghost, appearing and vanishing in moments, leaving behind instructions, weapons, or hope. To her British handlers, she was one of the most valuable field agents in continental Europe. But Christine herself was already beginning to feel displaced. The war that had given her purpose was slowly ending. And with peace, she sensed a darkness she could not yet name, a foreboding that would prove tragically prophetic. 9. Post-liberation. Espionage's Cold Shadow, 1945 to 1946. As the war in Europe drew to a close in May 1945, Christine Granville found herself at a profound crossroads. She had spent 6 harrowing, purpose-driven years immersed in clandestine missions, high-stakes deceptions, and violent resistance. With peace declared, her usefulness to the Special Operations Executive, SOE, was effectively over, but peace did not bring peace of mind. Christine's transition to civilian life was jarring. She was offered a position in British intelligence in London, but the work was administrative, detached from the urgency and adrenaline she had thrived on. Within weeks, she resigned. She tried to return to Poland, only to learn that it was now under Soviet control and that she would likely be considered a traitor or enemy of the state due to her British affiliations. Her homeland was no longer her own. In London, Christine moved from one modest lodging to another, her income unstable, her papers still often under aliases. She worked various jobs, as a hotel maid, a switchboard operator, even as a stewardess on ocean liners. Her former SOE comrades often tried to help her, especially those whose lives she had saved, but she refused to rely on charity or sentiment. Her pride was ironclad. In these years, Christine exhibited increasing signs of restlessness and depression. She was known to wander the streets at night, unable to sleep. She drank more heavily. She had lovers, but no lasting attachments. The intensity of her wartime identity had left her emotionally unmoored in the peace she had helped secure. Yet she was not forgotten. She received the George Medal, the Croix de Guerre with Palm, and an OBE, Officer of the Order of the British Empire. Still, none of these accolades seemed to satisfy her. To friends, she would say she didn't miss the war, but she missed having something to fight for. She maintained sporadic contact with former SOE agents, especially Francis Cammert's, whose life she had saved in Digny. Letters between them reveal her longing to be remembered, not just as a hero, but as someone capable of feeling, living, and being useful beyond espionage. She also attempted to write a memoir, encouraged by publishers intrigued by the romantic image of the beautiful spy who had outwitted Nazis. But Christine struggled to translate her life into linear narrative. Her stories were fractured, elusive, filled with coded names and untraceable events. Her manuscript was never completed. By 1946, she was adrift. The British government, while honoring her in ceremony, had no clear place for someone like Christine in its post-war apparatus. Her file was closed. The war was over, but for Christine Granville, the silence that followed was the hardest battlefield yet. The Final Years and Tragic Death, 1947 to 1952. In the post-war years, Christine Granville drifted through life like a ghost of wartime Europe, celebrated in whispers, forgotten in the halls of power. By 1947, she was scraping by in London, clinging to small jobs that rarely lasted. She worked as a stewardess on ocean liners, traveling between England and South Africa. These voyages, though menial, offered fleeting tastes of movement and purpose, echoes of a time when her travels changed lives. Her appearance, once striking and radiant, now bore the shadows of exhaustion. She was still magnetic in company, charming, sharp-witted, and worldly, but behind the laughter, her friends noticed a deep melancholy. She lived with minimal belongings, often keeping a pistol in her handbag out of old habits. She continued to use assumed names, even long after they were necessary. Christine's emotional life remained turbulent. She had many admirers, but no stable partner. One of her most persistent admirers was Dennis Muldowney, a former merchant seaman who had met her while she was working on a ship. Muldowney became infatuated, obsessively so. Christine, ever the independent spirit, rejected his advances repeatedly. He became possessive, writing her long, increasingly erratic letters and appearing unexpectedly at places she worked or stayed. By early 1952, Christine had grown alarmed. She confided in friends that she felt followed and harassed, but few grasped the severity of the situation. Muldowney's obsession turned lethal. On June 15, 1952, He followed her to the Shelbourne Hotel in Kensington, where she was staying under the name Christine Granville. He confronted her in a hallway and, in a fit of jealous rage, stabbed her through the heart with a knife. She died almost instantly. Christine Granville was 44 years old. The news shocked her remaining wartime colleagues and the few friends who still knew her story. Muldowney was arrested, tried, and swiftly sentenced to death. He reportedly said, "To kill is the final possession." His delusion and violence ended a life that had outwitted the Gestapo but could not escape post-war loneliness and male obsession. Her funeral, modest but dignified, was attended by a handful of wartime friends and a scattering of strangers who had known her only through myth. She was buried in London's Kensal Green Cemetery under her adopted name. Though honored in government citations and posthumous decorations, Christine's death marked an eerie footnote in Britain's reckoning with its wartime heroes. There were no parades, no national moments of silence. Just a woman who had once terrified Nazis, now gone, stabbed in a quiet hallway. Underscore 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 underscore. 11. Legacy and remembrance. In the decades following her death, Christine Granville's legend lived on mostly through the recollections of those who had served with her. But for many years, she was largely overlooked by official histories. Her name did not appear in the schoolbooks of Britain or Poland. She became a footnote, a myth whispered among intelligence circles, but absent from the broader canon of World War II remembrance. That began to change in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Biographies and documentaries brought renewed attention to her life. The most notable of these was Claire Muley's 2012 biography, The Spy Who Loved, which drew from newly declassified files, personal letters, and interviews with surviving acquaintances. It reintroduced Christine as not just a wartime hero, but a complex woman, flawed, fierce, lonely, and unforgettable. Her name has since been inscribed on memorials to SOE agents. In Poland, she is increasingly recognized as one of the nation's most extraordinary daughters, a woman who, though exiled, never stopped fighting for the values her homeland had been robbed of. In 2017, a blue plaque was unveiled in her honor at the hotel in Kensington, where she spent her final days. The inscription simply reads, Christine Granville, 1908 to 1952, SOE agent. Britain's first female special agent of the Second World War. Yet perhaps her greatest legacy lies in the lives she touched, the resistance networks she helped build, the prisoners she freed, the morale she raised in the darkest moments of Nazi occupation. Her courage inspired those around her to act bravely, even when all seemed lost. Christine once said she believed in causes, not countries. Her cause was freedom. And while freedom rarely rewards its champions with peace, it remembers their fire.